Ever had that sinking feeling? That moment when you realize someone's taken something precious from you, something you've poured your heart and soul into, and they've done it with a smug sense of entitlement? Well, I have. Imagine my $40,000 vintage military Jeep, a piece of family history, vanished in a thin air, stolen by an HOA Karen who thought she ruled our little world. But she underestimated me, and she definitely didn't count on modern technology. This is the story of how that arrogance led me right to her doorstep and to a victory that was sweeter than any I'd known since leaving the service. Where are you all watching from today? I'd love to hear if any of you have had your own battles with an overzealous HOA or someone who just thought the rules didn't apply to them. Drop a comment below. I'm sure we've all got stories. My name is Alex, and just 6 months before this whole mess started, I'd moved into Willow Creek Estates. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a quiet suburban life after 10 years in the Army. I bought a modest little house, the kind with a small yard I figured I could manage, and a 2-car garage that was crucial for my pride and joy. The Major, he was a 1952 Willys M38A1, lovingly restored to his former glory. My grandfather, a Korean War vet, also named Major Thomas Ashton, had found him as a wreck, and we'd spent the better part of my teenage years and early 20s, whenever I was on leave, bringing him back to life. He was worth a good $40,000 in parts and labor, but to me, his sentimental value was immeasurable. He was my connection to Gramps, to a different time, to a sense of order and discipline I still cherished. Willow Creek Estates was, on the surface, idyllic. Manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and a palpable sense of control. The Homeowners Association, presided over by a woman named Eleanor Ainsworth, was notorious, I'd soon learn. I'd received the thick welcome packet of rules and regulations, of course. Skimmed through it. Nothing in there seemed to forbid a beautifully restored, fully operational, and legally registered vintage military vehicle from being parked in one's own driveway during daylight hours while, say, I was unloading groceries or preparing for a weekend drive. I wasn't one to cause trouble. I just wanted to live quietly, work on my new civilian career as a cybersecurity consultant, and maybe, just maybe, take the Major out for a spin on sunny Saturdays. The first sign of trouble came subtly, a week after I'd moved the Major from my parents' place into my garage. A crisp, cream-colored envelope was tucked in my mailbox. No stamp, just my address typed neatly. Inside, a note. Dear resident, it has been observed that a vehicle of a non-standard aesthetic is periodically parked on your property. Please refer to Section 7, Subsection B, Paragraph 4 of the Willow Creek Estates Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions regarding vehicle appearance and conformity. Cordially, E. Ainsworth, President, WCHOA. Non-standard aesthetic. I thought, a flicker of annoyance sparking. I pulled out the dense CC and RS. Section 7, Subsection B, Paragraph 4, spoke vaguely about vehicles needing to be in good repair and not unsightly. The Major was immaculate. He gleamed. He was a piece of history. This woman clearly has too much time on her hands. I decided, perhaps naively, that it was a generic warning. Maybe she hadn't seen him up close. I'll make sure to keep him mostly garaged anyway, so I let it slide. A mistake. A few weeks later, on a bright Saturday morning, I'd pulled the Major out. I was planning to change his oil, a ritual I enjoyed. I ran inside to grab a wrench I'd forgotten. I couldn't have been gone for more than 10 minutes. When I came back out, my heart plummeted into my boots. The driveway was empty. Just a dark stain where the Major's oil pan had a minuscule, characterful weep. Gone. Vanished. My first thought was straightforward theft. I grabbed my phone, ready to dial 911, my mind racing, a cold dread washing over me. But then I saw it, another one of those damn cream envelopes, this one taped to my front door, flapping slightly in a breeze. My blood ran cold and hot. With trembling fingers, I tore it open. Dear Mr. Donovan, it began, the formality a stark contrast to the outrage simmering within me. Per multiple warnings, a blatant lie, I'd only received that one vague note. and your continued noncompliance with Willow Creek Estates Vehicle Conformity Regulations, Section 7, Subsection B, Paragraph 4, and newly ratified Addendum 7B for a prohibition of military-style vehicles. Your 1952 Willis M38A1, license plate MJRTHMS, has been deemed in violation and subsequently removed from the premises by an authorized HOA towing service. My jaw tightened. Newly ratified addendum? When did that happen? And authorized by whom, exactly? The letter continued. The vehicle is currently impounded. To reclaim it, you will be required to pay the accrued towing fee of $750, a daily storage fee of $150, and an HOA non-compliance penalty of $500. These fees are subject to increase. Please contact the HOA office during business hours to arrange for payment and retrieval. Sincerely, Eleanor Ainsworth, President, WCHOA. $750 for towing, $150 a day for storage, $500 penalty? This was extortion, plain and simple. And military-style vehicles? That was a new one, conveniently specific. The Major wasn't some surplus junker. He was a classic. The injustice of it, the sheer audacity, hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just towed my Jeep, they'd stolen him. And Eleanor Ainsworth had signed her name to it. Oh, you have no idea who you've just messed with, lady. My military training, the part of me that valued precision, rules, and righteous anger, surged to the forefront. The quiet suburban life? That was on hold. It was time to bring a different kind of order to Willow Creek. My initial shock gave way to a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just about a Jeep. It was about the abuse of power, about the blatant disregard for fairness. Eleanor Ainsworth had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness. She had no idea that the very discipline and analytical skills honed by years in the Army were now going to be focused entirely on her. She wants to play by rules? Fine. We'll play by the real rules, not just the ones she invents. The first thing I did was reread that infuriating letter. Newly ratified Addendum 7B, for my mind latched onto that. HOAs have procedures for ratifying addendums. Meetings, votes, notifications to homeowners. I'd received nothing. This smelled fishier than a week-old mackerel. My training in signals had also made me meticulous about records and data. I immediately went to my computer and pulled up the Willow Creek Estates HOA website, a clunky, outdated thing that looked like it was designed in 1998. I searched for minutes of meetings, announcements, anything about this new addendum. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Then a small, grim smile touched my lips. Eleanor Ainsworth had made a critical error. She assumed I was just some random civilian she could bully. She didn't know that the Major, bless his vintage soul, was equipped with a few modern upgrades. One of them was a discreet, hardwired GPS tracker. Gramps had been a bit of a tech enthusiast in his later years, and when we were restoring the Major, he'd insisted on it. Just in case, Alex, he'd said with a wink. Old soldiers need to keep tabs on their assets. I'd maintained the subscription, more out of sentiment than perceived necessity. Until now. I pulled up the tracking app on my phone. My heart hammered against my ribs. There he was, a little green dot representing $40,000 of steel, memories, and righteous indignation. He wasn't at some well-known, legitimate impound lot. No, the dot was pinging from a private address, a warehouse-looking building in an industrial park about 20 miles away, a place called Ainsworth Secure Storage Ainsworth. Well, isn't that convenient? The name itself was a red flag, waving furiously. It was too coincidental. Was this her private little fiefdom, a place where she stashed the spoils of her HOA tyranny? My mind raced. Okay, Alex, think. Don't charge in there. Strategy. Evidence. This wasn't a battlefield where I could call in air support. This was a civilian matter, albeit one that felt like a declaration of war. I needed proof, undeniable proof, not just a GPS ping that she could try to explain away. I needed to understand the scope of her operation. I spent the next hour online, digging into Ainsworth Secure Storage. It was a registered business, all right. Owner? Eleanor Ainsworth. Surprise, surprise. The towing company, Willow Creek Recovery, mentioned in her letter though I hadn't received an official invoice from them. Just her HOA demand was harder to find concrete links for, but a quick cross-reference of business registration addresses showed it shared a P.O. box with a company owned by a Harold Ainsworth, likely her husband or another close relative. The conflict of interest was staggering. She was essentially finding residents, then having their property towed by a company likely connected to her to a storage facility she owned, where she could rack up exorbitant fees. This wasn't just about my Jeep. This was a racket. My anger was a cold, steady burn now. This woman was running a predatory scheme under the guise of HOA governance. My experience in analyzing intelligence data kicked in. I started a new file on my secure drive. Operation Reclaim Major. I had documented everything. The letter, the lack of due process for the addendum, the GPS location, the business record for Ainsworth Secure Storage, and the potential link to Willow Creek Recovery. Every detail, every screenshot, every discrepancy. The skills I'd learned tracking far more dangerous targets were now being applied to a suburban despot. The irony wasn't lost on me, but the drive for justice was just as strong. Eleanor Ainsworth thought she'd swatted a fly. She was about to find out she'd kicked a hornet's nest. The quiet life I'd sought was indeed over, but a new mission had just begun. And this mission, like all others, required allies. It was time to see who else in Willow Creek Estates had a score to settle with its queen. My first step in gathering intelligence on the ground was to visit the address indicated by the GPS, Ainsworth Secure Storage. Not to confront, not yet, just to reconnoiter. I drove my everyday sedan, blending in with the light industrial traffic. The facility was surrounded by a high chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, a single gated entrance manned by a bored-looking security guard in a booth. It looked less like a place for people to willingly store their precious belongings and more like a fortress for ill-gotten gains. I could see rows of anonymous-looking storage units and a larger warehouse structure at the back. The major was likely in one of those, or perhaps inside the main warehouse. The GPS was accurate to within a few meters. He was in there. Driving by slowly, I noted the security cameras, the type of gate, the guard's routine. Standard stuff, but still good to know. My next stop was back in Willow Creek. I needed to find Mr. Henderson. During my first week, while walking off the stress of unpacking, I'd met Arthur Henderson, a retiree in his late 70s, tending his roses. He'd introduced himself, mentioned he was on the original HOA establishment committee decades ago, but had long since washed his hands of the current board shenanigans. He'd had a shrewd look in his eye and a tone that suggested he knew where all the neighborhood bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. He was my best bet for an insider's perspective. I found him on his porch, reading a thick, legal-looking tome. "Mr. Henderson," I began, "do you have a moment? It's about the HOA and my Jeep." He peered at me over his spectacles. "Ah, Mr. Donovan," the young man with the splendid old soldier of a vehicle. "Heard there was some excitement this morning. Come, sit. Tell me Eleanor's latest masterpiece of petty tyranny." I laid out the story. The vague initial note, the sudden disappearance of the major, the letter citing a non-existent addendum, the exorbitant fees, and my discovery of Ainsworth Secure Storage. As I spoke, his expression went from grim to thunderous. "That woman," he finally exploded, slapping his hand on the armrest. "She's gone too far this time. A newly ratified addendum, you say? Balderdash. The bylaws are explicit. Amendments require a 30-day notice to all homeowners, a public meeting, and a 2/3 majority vote. There's been no meeting, no vote, no notice. She's fabricated it. Alex fabricated it whole cloth." "That's what I figured," I said. "And the storage facility? Owned by her. The towing company is likely a family business, too." Mr. Henderson nodded slowly. "Harold, her husband, runs a string of service companies. Plumbing, landscaping, and yes, a tow truck he bought last year. Calls it Willow Creek Recovery. It's all a closed loop, a money-making machine fueled by her dictatorial enforcement of imaginary rules. She's been nickel-and-diming people for years. Fines for grass being a quarter-inch too long, the wrong shade of beige on their curtains. But this is grand larceny dressed up in HOA letterhead. Grand larceny. The words echoed what I was feeling. I have the GPS location of my Jeep, I told him. But I need more than that to go to the police. Something concrete to show this isn't just a dispute over bylaws, but a criminal enterprise. Indeed, Mr. Henderson mused, tapping his chin. Eleanor's arrogance is usually her undoing. She believes she's untouchable. We need to find others she's targeted, Alex. There are bound to be more. People who've been too intimidated to speak up. He then mentioned a young couple, the Patels, who lived down the street. She forced them to tear out a beautiful, professionally installed children's playset last month. Claimed it violated aesthetic harmony, cost them thousands. They were heartbroken. Perhaps they'd be willing to talk. I thanked Mr. Henderson, his indignation a welcome fuel to my own. He promised to dig through his old HOA records for any past instances of Ainsworth's overreach or procedural violations. She's slippery, Alex, he warned, but she always leaves a trail, thinking no one's smart enough to follow it. My next visit was to the Patels. They were hesitant at first, clearly still smarting from their experience. Mr. Patel, a software engineer named Raj, looked weary. His wife, Priya, had tears in her eyes as she described how Ainsworth had shown up with a clipboard and a condescending smirk, issuing daily fines until they capitulated and removed the playset their two young children adored. She said it was an unapproved structure, Priya said, her voice trembling slightly. We showed her the pre-approval from the previous board president, but she just waved it away, said she was the president now and her rules were the ones that mattered. We even offered to paint it, to plant shrubs around it. Nothing was good enough. Did she recommend a company to remove it? I asked, a hunch forming. Raj snorted. Oh yes, Ainsworth Demolition and Hauling, we got a quote. It was 3 times what other companies charged. We ended up doing it ourselves, took a whole weekend. Another Ainsworth enterprise. The pattern was becoming clearer, uglier. I explained my situation with the major, showed them the letter, mentioned the storage facility. Raj's eyes widened. She actually took your vehicle? And it's at her own storage place? That's theft. That's what I intend to prove, I said. Would you be willing to provide a statement about your experience with a playset and her pressuring you to use her family's company? They looked at each other. Priya nodded first. Yes, what she's doing isn't right. We were scared, but if you're fighting back, we'll support you, Raj agreed, his weariness replaced by a flicker of determination. They didn't have financial records of the demolition quote, as they dismissed it out of hand, but their testimony about the pressure and the name of the company would be valuable. Over the next few days, with Mr. Henderson's discreet inquiries and my own careful conversations, a small network of aggrieved homeowners began to form. There was Mrs. Gable, an elderly widow fined repeatedly because her cat, Mittens, dared to sunbathe on her own porch. Ainsworth had cited a non-existent pet containment rule. There was Tom Larson, who'd been forced to repaint his front door 3 times because Ainsworth kept changing her mind about the approved shade of forest green. Each story added another layer to the picture of Eleanor Ainsworth's reign of petty terror and financial opportunism. Many had paid small, unjust fines just to make her go away. My $40,000 Jeep, however, was a different league of extortion. It was the overreach that might just break her. During this time, I also did a little electronic reconnaissance. Ainsworth Secure Storage had a website as basic as the HOAs. It listed contact numbers and an email. I used a secure, anonymous email service to send an inquiry, posing as a potential customer. Eleanor herself replied, her tone curt and businesslike, quoting rates. It was another small piece confirming her direct involvement in the day-to-day of the storage business. I also set up a discreet wildlife camera, disguised as a birdhouse, across the street from my driveway, just in case she or her cronies decided to pay another unwelcome visit or try to tamper with my other car. My paranoia, or perhaps my preparedness, was now in full swing. Mr. Henderson, true to his word, unearthed gold. He found copies of the original HOA bylaws and all legitimately ratified amendments. There was no mention, of course, of any prohibition of military-style vehicles. He also found minutes from an old board meeting where a proposal by Ainsworth to grant the HOA president unilateral authority to remove vehicles was soundly defeated. "She's been wanting this power for years," he said, handing me the documents. "She just decided to grant it to herself." The evidence was piling up. Ainsworth wasn't just a power-mad HOA president. She was committing fraud, extortion, and very likely grand theft auto. The GPS still showed the major sitting in her storage facility, a silent hostage. It was time to formulate a plan to liberate him and bring Eleanor Ainsworth's empire crashing down. The investigation phase was fruitful. Now for strategy. With a growing dossier of evidence and a small but determined group of allies, the next step was to craft a plan. This wasn't just about getting the major back. It was about dismantling Eleanor Ainsworth's corrupt system and ensuring she faced consequences for her actions. Mr. Henderson, with his legal background, proved invaluable. Raj Patel, with his tech savviness, offered to help analyze any digital footprint we could find. "We need to approach this methodically," Mr. Henderson advised during one of our strategy sessions in his sunroom, surrounded by meticulously organized files. A direct confrontation at her storage facility without undeniable proof of criminal intent might just result in her claiming it's a civil dispute over HOA fees. She'll lawyer up, tie it in knots for months, and the major will continue to rot in her overpriced shed. So, we need to prove the theft aspect, not just the HOA rule-breaking I summarized. The fact she fabricated the addendum is key. The conflict of interest with the towing and storage is also crucial. Raj, who had been quietly looking over the business registration printouts I'd gathered, spoke up. "I did some digging into Willow Creek Recovery. It's registered to Harold Ainsworth, as you suspected. But more than that, their listed business address is just a residential house, their house. They don't have a commercial depot. And their fleet? It appears to be a single, aging flatbed tow truck. I also found a few online reviews, all 1-star from people in other neighborhoods claiming predatory towing practices, but nothing recent from Willow Creek until now. So it's not even a legitimate, full-scale towing operation," I mused. "It's probably just Harold and his truck on call for Eleanor's personal vendettas." This made it even more egregious. Our plan started to take shape, a multi-pronged approach. 1. Formal legal challenge. Mr. Henderson would draft a formal cease and desist letter to Eleanor Ainsworth and the HOA board, detailing the illegal towing, the fabricated addendum, the conflicts of interest, and demanding the immediate, no-cost return of my vehicle. This would put her on formal notice and create a paper trail. 2. Police report, second attempt. I had initially hesitated to call the police again after the first dismissal of it as a civil matter, but now, armed with evidence of a falsified rule, the self-dealing storage, and potentially a fraudulent towing operation, I would file a formal police report for grand theft auto and fraud, emphasizing the criminal elements. We hoped the compiled evidence would make them take it seriously. 3. Community awareness. We needed to inform the other homeowners in Willow Creek. Many were likely unaware of the extent of Ainsworth's machinations, or too intimidated to question her. We decided to draft an anonymous letter, factual, non-inflammatory, outlining the situation with my Jeep, the fabricated rules, and the financial self-dealings, supported by copies of the actual bylaws versus her claims. This would be carefully distributed. The goal was to create internal pressure on the HOA board, some of whom might be innocent pawns or simply unaware. 4. The sting, contingency. This was my contribution, drawing on my old skill set. If the legal and police route stalled, or if Ainsworth tried to move or dispose of the major, I needed a way to recover him decisively. The GPS was step 1. Step 2 was observation. I planned to discreetly monitor Ainsworth's secure storage. The wildlife camera I'd set up at my house had given me an idea. What if I could get a look inside the unit the major was in? It was a long shot, but worth considering. While Mr. Henderson began drafting the legal documents, I focused on the police report. I meticulously organized my evidence. Copies of Ainsworth's letter, the actual CC and RS, screenshots of the GPS location, business record for her storage facility and her husband's towing company, and sworn affidavits from the Patels and Mrs. Gable about their own experiences with Ainsworth's predatory practices and fabricated rules. It was a compelling package. Meanwhile, Eleanor Ainsworth was not idle. A few days after the Major's abduction, another cream envelope appeared, this time with a formal-looking invoice from Willow Creek Recovery for $750 and a separate one from Ainsworth Secure Storage for the first week's storage, $1,050, 7 days x $150, plus a reiterated demand for the $500 HOA penalty. Total, $2,300. And a little handwritten note at the bottom from Eleanor herself. Mr. Donovan, these fees are accumulating daily. Prompt payment is advised to avoid further complications, including potential lien sale of the abandoned vehicle. Yeah. Abandoned vehicle? The audacity. I've been in contact, albeit through her threatening letters. She was trying to build a false narrative. The threat of a lien sale was particularly alarming. She was escalating, trying to intimidate me into paying her outrageous, fraudulent fees. This only strengthened my resolve. The stakes were definitely rising. Raj helped me draft the anonymous letter to the homeowners. We kept it factual, focusing on the bylaws, the lack of due process, and the clear financial benefit to the Ainsworth family from these punitive actions. We included a copy of the actual Section 7, subsection B, paragraph 4, and pointed out the absence of any addendum about military-style vehicles. We made 100 copies. Under the cover of darkness, wearing nondescript clothing, Raj and I walked the quiet streets of Willow Creek Estates, slipping the letters into mailboxes. It felt a bit clandestine, but necessary. The day after the letters went out, there was a definite shift in the neighborhood atmosphere. Curtains twitched more than usual. Neighbors were seen conversing in hushed tones on street corners. I even got a few anonymous calls, blocked numbers from people whispering their support, telling me of their own run-ins with Ainsworth, too afraid to speak publicly but wishing me luck. One woman even claimed she'd seen Harold Ainsworth himself driving the tow truck that took my Jeep, and that Eleanor had been standing on her porch, watching with a satisfied smirk. Another potential witness, if she could be persuaded. Eleanor, predictably, reacted with fury. The HOA website posted a new, strident announcement. It has come to the attention of the board that malicious and false information is being circulated regarding legitimate HOA operations. Rest assured, all actions taken by the HOA are in full compliance with the CC and RS and are for the benefit of all property values. Attempts to undermine the board's authority will be met with appropriate action. Benefit of all property values, my foot, I thought. More like the benefit of the Ainsworth Family Retirement Fund. Her defensive posture told me the letters had hit a nerve. Mr. Henderson finalized his powerful cease and desist letter. We sent it via certified mail with return receipt requested to Eleanor Ainsworth personally and to each member of the HOA board. The clock was ticking. My attempt to file a new police report was initially met with the same frustrating brush-off. Sir, HOA disputes are typically civil matters, the desk sergeant said, barely looking at my folder of evidence. With all due respect, Sergeant, I said, keeping my voice calm but firm, this is beyond a simple dispute. This involves the fabrication of legal documents, conflicts of interest leading to financial gain, and the theft of a $40,000 vehicle under false pretenses. That's fraud and grand larceny. I have evidence of a pattern of behavior. I pushed the folder across the counter. Please, just have a detective look at it. My name is Alex Donovan. I'm an Army veteran. I don't make frivolous complaints. Perhaps it was the mention of the Army or the sheer thickness of my evidence file, but his demeanor shifted slightly. He sighed. Okay, Mr. Donovan, I'll pass it to Detective Miller. He handles property crimes and fraud, but no promises. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The pressure was building on multiple fronts. Eleanor Ainsworth was continuing her maneuvers, trying to legitimize her theft with bogus invoices and threats. But our counterplan was in motion. The community was stirring, the legal challenge was formalized, and the police, however reluctantly, had my file. The question was, who would crack first? And what would Eleanor do when she realized she was genuinely cornered? I had a feeling her arrogance wouldn't allow for a graceful retreat. This was heading for a direct confrontation. The waiting was the hardest part. A few days passed after we sent the cease and desist letters, and I filed the police report. The certified mail receipts came back, showing Eleanor Ainsworth and the other 3 HOA board members had signed for their copies. Silence from their end. The GPS on the major remained stubbornly fixed on Ainsworth Secure Storage. The daily storage fees were theoretically piling up, according to her illicit calculus. Then, Detective Miller called. "Mr. Donovan?" "Detective Miller, RPD. I've reviewed your file. It's interesting." His tone was cautious, non-committal, but not dismissive. That was progress. The fabricated addendum part and the direct financial link between Mrs. Ainsworth, the towing, and the storage facility. That's definitely more than a typical HOA squabble. "Can you come in tomorrow morning? I'd like to talk this through in more detail." Finally, a breakthrough. "Yes, sir. I'll be there," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. Meanwhile, the anonymous letters were having an effect in Willow Creek. Mr. Henderson reported that the other board members, a mild-mannered accountant named Peterson, a nervous woman named Carol Jenkins who always seemed flustered, and a retiree who mostly golfed, Mr. Albright, were apparently starting to ask questions. Ainsworth had always run the show, steamrolling any dissent, but the documented proof of her self-dealing and rule fabrication was making them antsy. There were rumors of a hastily called emergency board meeting at Ainsworth's house. My meeting with Detective Miller was productive. He was a seasoned officer, sharp and observant. I walked him through the timeline, the evidence, the pattern of Ainsworth's behavior. I emphasized that the Major wasn't just any vehicle. It was a valuable, restored classic, and its sentimental worth was even higher. I showed him the GPS tracking data, live on my phone, proving its current location at her facility. So, she essentially creates a rule out of thin air, uses her husband's tow truck to impound your vehicle at her own storage lot, and then tries to charge you thousands to get it back. Miller summarized, leaning back in his chair. "That's the gist of it, Detective," I confirmed. "And I believe she's done similar, smaller-scale things to other residents, creating a climate of fear." Miller nodded slowly. "Theft by deception, possibly extortion, operating a fraudulent scheme. It's got legs. The problem with HOAs is they often operate in this gray area where civil and criminal lines get blurred. But this level of blatant self-enrichment and falsification is leaning pretty heavily into criminal territory." He paused. "Tell you what, I can't just go storming in there based on a GPS ping alone for a civilly disputed tow, even if it smells bad. But if she tries to move it, or if you get information she's attempting to sell it or part out under this lien sale threat she made, that changes things. That's active deprivation of property. Keep that GPS active. And keep your ears open." He also said he'd make some discreet inquiries about Ainsworth Secure Storage and Willow Creek Recovery. While not a promise of immediate action, it felt like the official wheels were beginning to turn. The emergency board meeting at Ainsworth's house apparently didn't go smoothly for her. Carol Jenkins, the nervous board member, actually called Mr. Henderson afterwards, nearly in tears. According to her, Eleanor had been furious about the cease and desist letters and the community backlash. When Peterson, the accountant, had questioned the legality of the military vehicle addendum and the financial arrangements, Ainsworth had reportedly flown into a rage, accusing them of disloyalty and threatening them with complicity if they didn't back her. She'd insisted everything was above board and that I was just a troublemaker trying to evade legitimate fees. Jenkins admitted she was terrified of Ainsworth, but also scared of legal repercussions if this blew up. She confessed that Ainsworth had presented the addendum to them as a minor clarification, and they just rubber-stamped it without really reading or understanding the approval process. This was good. Ainsworth's support structure was cracking. Her enablers were getting weak knees. It was 2 days later, a Thursday afternoon. I was working from home, one eye on my code, the other on the GPS app. Suddenly, the little green dot representing the Major moved. My heart leaped into my throat. It wasn't a big move, just a shift within the Ainsworth Secure Storage compound, from one section to another, deeper into the facility. What is she doing? My mind raced. Was she trying to hide him better? Prepare him for transport? My agreement with Detective Miller replayed in my head. If she tries to move it, that changes things. This wasn't a move off the property, but it was activity. I decided it was time for a closer look. My sting contingency was now active. That evening, after dark, I drove back to Ainsworth Secure Storage. I parked a street away and approached on foot, dressed in dark clothing, carrying a small backpack with a high-powered flashlight, my phone, and a compact, high-resolution borescope camera, a leftover from my Army toolkit, surprisingly useful for inspecting tight spaces like, say, the gap under a roll-up storage door. The facility was quieter than during the day. The main gate was closed, the guard in his booth, intermittently illuminated by the glow of a small television. I circled around to a less monitored section of the fence. One I'd noted earlier had slightly looser tension wires. It was child's play to snip a couple of links discreetly at the bottom, creating a small opening I could slip through. I was inside the perimeter. Old habits die hard, I thought with a grim flicker of satisfaction. Using the GPS on my phone, I navigated through the rows of silent storage units, the cold metal reflecting the faint moonlight. The app led me to a large, windowless steel building at the very back of the lot, the main warehouse I'd seen before. The GPS signal was strong. The major was inside. There were several large roll-up doors, all securely locked. I crept along the wall, looking for any weakness, any point of observation. One of the doors had a small gap at the bottom, maybe half an inch. Not enough to see much, but enough for the borescope. Heart pounding, I carefully uncoiled the flexible camera probe and slid it underneath. The tiny LED on the tip illuminated the dusty concrete floor on the other side. I maneuvered it slowly, the image appearing on my phone screen. And then I saw him, the major. He was there, parked next to a couple of other vehicles. A fancy-looking speedboat on a trailer and a vintage convertible, both covered in dust sheets. But my Jeep had a bright orange auction sticker slapped on his windshield. Lot number 237. AS is, and next to him, on a workbench, were tools. And Harold Ainsworth. He was hunched over the major's engine bay, a wrench in his hand, looking like he was in the process of removing something. My blood boiled. They weren't just storing him. They were preparing to sell him at some shady auction, and it looked like Harold was maybe even planning to strip some valuable, easily removable parts beforehand. The vintage military radio, perhaps, or the custom-fitted canvas top. This was no longer just about predatory fees. This was active, malicious theft and destruction of property. I retracted the borescope, my hands shaking with adrenaline and fury. I had it. I had the visual. I immediately took a series of screenshots from the borescope feed, time-stamped by the app. Then I backed away, slipped out the way I came, and repaired the fence links as best I could. As I walked briskly back to my car, I dialed Detective Miller. "Detective," I said, my voice tight. "It's Alex Donovan. You told me to call if she tried to move it or sell it. She's doing both. My Jeep has an auction sticker on it, and her husband is currently working on it in their warehouse. Looks like he's stripping parts. I have visual confirmation." There was a pause on the other end. Then Miller's voice, crisp and decisive. "Where are you, Mr. Donovan?" "About a block from Ainsworth Secure Storage." "Stay put. Don't go back in. Don't engage. I'm dispatching a unit to your location to meet you. And I'm getting a warrant." Looks like Mrs. Ainsworth just crossed a very bright line. The wave of relief was immense, quickly followed by a surge of anticipation. The plan was in motion. Eleanor Ainsworth thought she was untouchable, operating in the shadows of her self-made rules. But she'd underestimated my resolve, my skills, and the simple fact that right is right. The final act was about to begin. Her carefully constructed facade was about to come crashing down, and I would be there to see it. The major was coming home. Within 15 minutes, a patrol car pulled up beside me. I showed the two officers the borescope images on my phone. Their eyes widened. One of them whistled. "Auction sticker? And Buddy Boy under the hood?" "Yeah, that's not good." They radioed Detective Miller, confirming what I'd shown them. Miller came over the radio himself. Warrant is being signed by the judge as we speak. ETA 10 minutes for me and a backup team. Secure the perimeter. Don't let anyone in or out of that main warehouse. Donovan, you stay with them. You're a witness. The next 10 minutes felt like an eternity. I sat in my car, watching the entrance to Ainsworth Secure Storage, the patrol car, discreetly parked at an angle that covered the gate. My mind replayed the image of Harold Ainsworth leaning over the major, tools in hand. The violation of it, the sheer, thieving arrogance. They really thought they could get away with this. Then, two more unmarked police cars and a marked SUV carrying a search warrant team rolled up silently, lights off. Detective Miller emerged from the lead car, warrant in hand. He conferred briefly with the patrol officers, then beckoned me over. Mr. Donovan, you're sure about what you saw? Your vehicle, auction sticker, Harold Ainsworth attempting to remove parts. Positive detective. The borescope footage is date and time stamped. All right, we're going in. You stay back with Officer Ramirez here. For your safety and to maintain the integrity of the scene, he turned to his team. Let's go. Quietly at first, they approached the main warehouse. The large roll-up door I'd looked under was still down. Miller knocked, loud and firm. Police. Search warrant. Open up. Silence. Then at the muffled scuffling sound from within. Police. Open the door, Mr. Ainsworth, or we'll force entry. Miller's voice brooked no argument. More silence. Then, with a reluctant, grinding groan, the roll-up door began to inch upwards. It stopped about 3 feet from the ground. Peeking out from underneath, looking bewildered and greasy, was Harold Ainsworth. What's going on? He stammered, blinking in the sudden flashlight beams. We have a warrant to search these premises, sir, in relation to a stolen vehicle, a 1952 Willis Jeep, Miller stated, holding up the document. We have reason to believe it's in here, and that you are in the process of illegally tampering with or disposing of it. Harold's eyes darted nervously past the officers, perhaps looking for an escape that wasn't there. Stolen? No. This is an HOA matter. It's an impound. My wife, Eleanor, she handles all that. We'll talk to Mrs. Ainsworth later, Miller said, unimpressed. Right now, we're coming in. He gestured, and 2 officers ducked under the partially raised door, followed by Miller. I could hear their movements, then Miller's voice, clear and sharp. Well, what have we here? Lot number 237. Looks just like Mr. Donovan described. A moment later, an officer came back to the door and raised it fully. And there, under the harsh glare of industrial lighting, was the Major. The orange auction sticker was still on his windshield. A collection of tools lay on his fender. The vintage radio unit, a valuable and specific part, was sitting on the workbench beside him, wires dangling. Harold had indeed been in the process of stripping him. Harold Ainsworth just stood there, deflated, grease smudged on his face, looking utterly defeated. Eleanor said it was abandoned property. She said we could recoup the storage fees by selling it at auction and stripping its parts beforehand. Mr. Ainsworth? Miller asked, his voice laced with sarcasm. That's not how lien sales work, even if this were a legitimate impound, which it clearly isn't. He turned to one of his officers. Cuff him. Read him his rights. We've got possession of stolen property, tampering with evidence. As Harold was being cuffed, protesting weakly that it was all a misunderstanding, that Eleanor handled the paperwork, another car screeched to a halt outside the warehouse. It was Eleanor Ainsworth herself, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. She must have been alerted by Harold. What is the meaning of this outrage? She shrieked, storming towards the warehouse, her eyes blazing. You have no right to be on my property. This is harassment. I am the president of the Willow Creek HOA. Detective Miller stepped forward calmly, holding up the warrant. Mrs. Ainsworth, we have a search warrant, and your husband is currently under arrest for possession of stolen property and other related charges concerning this Jeep. He gestured towards a Major. Eleanor's eyes fell on the Major, then on her cuffed husband, then back to Miller. Her bravado seemed to falter for a split second, a flicker of panic in her eyes before the arrogant mask slammed back down. Stolen? That vehicle was impounded according to HOA regulations for numerous violations. This man, she pointed a trembling finger at me as I stood with Officer Ramirez near the entrance, is a troublemaker who refuses to pay his legitimate fees. Actually, Mrs. Ainsworth, Miller said, his tone dangerously mild, we have substantial evidence that the HOA regulation you're citing was fabricated by you, that there was no due process, that you directed your husband's towing company to seize the vehicle, stored it in your personal facility, and were attempting to illegally sell it and strip it for parts. That's not an HOA dispute. That's a series of criminal offenses. Grand theft auto, fraud, extortion. The list is quite long. Eleanor Ainsworth turned pale. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking pinched and suddenly much older. Fabricated? That's a lie. The board approved it. We've spoken to some of your board members, Mrs. Ainsworth, Miller continued relentlessly. They seem to have a different recollection of events. They also seem quite distressed to learn about your personal financial interest in all these violations and recoveries. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The fight seemed to visibly drain out of her. Her empire, built on petty rules and brazen corruption, was crumbling before her eyes. The sight of the major, my major, standing there, almost desecrated by her greed, filled me with a cold fury, but also a profound sense of vindication. Eleanor Ainsworth, Detective Miller said, his voice now official and firm. You are under arrest for suspicion of grand theft auto, scheme to defraud, and extortion. An officer stepped forward and gently but firmly took her arm. She didn't resist. She just stared, slack-jawed, as the cuffs clicked shut. The immediate aftermath was almost surreal. As Eleanor and Harold Ainsworth were led away in separate police cars, a crime scene unit began meticulously documenting everything in the warehouse. The major, the tools, the auction sticker, the other vehicles, which Miller said they'd be looking into as well, suspecting they might also be victims of similar schemes. Detective Miller came over to me. Well, Mr. Donovan, it appears you were absolutely correct. Your diligence in gathering evidence, and that timely call tonight, made all the difference. We'll need a formal statement from you, of course, and you'll have to identify your property. But the major, as you call him, will be released to you as soon as processing is complete, likely tomorrow. I looked at the major. He looked a bit forlorn with that sticker and the missing radio, but he was safe. He was mine. A wave of exhaustion, relief, and triumph washed over me. Thank you, Detective. Thank you for believing me. You made it easy to believe, he said with a slight smile. Not everyone comes with such a well-prepared case file. By God, there's actual justice. The Patels called, overjoyed, and thanking me for standing up when they hadn't felt they could. Even Carol Jenkins, the nervous board member, left a tearful voicemail apologizing for her complicity and offering to cooperate fully with the police and any HOA reforms. Later that day, I went to the police impound, a legitimate one this time, to reclaim the major. Seeing him roll out, even with the evidence tape still on parts of him, was a beautiful sight. The missing radio was recovered from Harold's workbench. There were a few new scratches, likely from the tow, but nothing I couldn't fix. The important thing was he was back. The legal fallout for the Ainsworths was swift and severe. Faced with overwhelming evidence, my GPS data, the borescope footage, the testimony from other victimized homeowners, the corroboration from the terrified board members, and the undeniable financial trail leading straight to their pockets, they had little room to maneuver. Harold, seeing the writing on the wall, cooperated in exchange for a lighter sentence, implicating Eleanor as the mastermind. Eleanor Ainsworth, stripped of her HOA presidency and her self-proclaimed authority, was a shadow of her former arrogant self in court. She was convicted of multiple felonies, including grand theft auto, fraud, and extortion. She received a significant prison sentence, a hefty fine, and was ordered to pay restitution not only to me for the attempted theft and damages to the major, but also to the Patels for their playset debacle and several other homeowners who came forward once she was charged. Ainsworth Secure Storage was shut down, its assets seized. Willow Creek Recovery ceased to exist. Her reign of terror was decisively over. The HOA itself was thrown into turmoil, but it was a cleansing fire. Mr. Henderson, with a renewed sense of purpose, stepped in as interim president. He, along with a newly emboldened group of homeowners, including Raj Patel, who was elected treasurer, began the arduous process of rewriting the bylaws to ensure transparency, fairness, and accountability. They removed all the vague, weaponized clauses Ainsworth had used, established clear procedures for everything, and made sure no single person could ever wield that kind of unchecked power again. They even started a fund to help residents who had been unjustly fined by Ainsworth. For me, life in Willow Creek Estates slowly returned to the quiet I'd initially sought, but it was a different kind of quiet now, one born of respect and community, not fear. I fixed the scratches on the Major, reinstalled his radio, and took him for a long, celebratory drive through the countryside, the engine humming a song of freedom. He wasn't just a Jeep anymore. He was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the fact that even in the face of petty tyranny, one determined individual, armed with truth and a bit of know-how, could make a difference. My cybersecurity consultancy was thriving, but I found I had a new, unexpected role in the neighborhood. The guy who'd taken down the HOA queen. People would wave, stop to chat, ask for advice. I didn't mind. It felt good to be part of a community that was healing and rebuilding. Sometimes I drive the Major through Willow Creek, and the sight of him, gleaming and proud, seems to bring smiles to people's faces. He's a reminder that bullies don't always win, that justice, even if delayed, can be incredibly satisfying. And as for me, well, I rediscovered a part of myself I thought I'd left behind in the Army. The part that fights for what's right, the part that doesn't back down. Gramps would have been proud. This victory, this peace, I dedicate to his memory and to the enduring spirit of the Major himself. So that's my story. It just goes to show you, never underestimate the quiet ones, and definitely don't mess with a soldier's Jeep. What do you all think? Have you ever had a moment where you had to stand up against an injustice like that, big or small? I'd love to read your experiences in the comments. Thanks for listening, and remember, sometimes the best defense is a good offense, especially when it's powered by a meticulous plan and a reliable GPS.